Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategy Gaming Dojo, where we find, learn, and play the great strategy games. Currently, we are making a basic tutorial for Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific Admirals Edition. This is episode number 7. This episode will continue on with task forces, but we will be creating some different kinds of task forces, which include submarines, anti-submarines, mine-laying task forces, and anti-mine laying task forces. We'll also do another tanker task force or two. We'll do some cargo task forces, and just talk about ships in general. You know, ships are the backbone of this game. That's how you're going to be moving your fuel and supplies, which are our two main um, finished products that we're worried about. That's how we fuel and supply our war machine with these two kind of abstracted ideas of overall fuel, overall supply. So we need to move those around the map. Now, last time we had been down here looking at Sydney. As we see, we've got now two little ships down here. It will never be more than two, but that means we have at least two task forces now at Sydney. Um, and we actually, in actuality, have three. So, as we saw last time, we have our Royal Australian Navy cruisers. It says cruisers as in plural, because we have a heavy cruiser, the Canberra, and a light cruiser, the Perth. Now, you may remember last time I said, well, we're just going to kind of forget about this. Easy for me to say, right? Um, I actually went ahead and set these orders. They are going to Bowen with a home port of Townsville, and they're going to remain on station. As long as we're in ships, we might as well go over what that means. That means, and you can see it here, this shows how far it will go every 12 hours on mission or cruise speed, how far it would go if we had it at full speed. We're going to be at mission or cruise speed 99% of the time with all ships. Full speed burns too much fuel. You only really use that in emergency situations or when you're trying to get troops, supplies into a hot war zone. So we're really not going to be at full speed often. This is usually how we're going to be moving. So we've got the Canberra and the Perth. Little confusing, right? Because they're named after Australian towns, but we've got those two ships moving up the coast here, and you'll always see where they're going and where they're ending through these yellow highlighted hexes. So they're going to Bowen, and we've set their home port at Townsville. Now I can tell you there are about 20, as an allied player, there are about 20, maybe 25 places on the map that will be the home port essentially for all of your ships. You want those to be the big ports that are, of course, important, but you want them to be big to rearm. In the case of ships like this, so cruisers, we're going to want them to rearm at some point. So we want the port to be big enough to rearm them efficiently. We said before that a level 7 port rearms things much, much faster than everything else. Now, Townsville is not a level 7 port. It right now is a level 3 port that has a suggested maximum size of 4. We're going to build this into a level 7 port. So, as I said before, you can go up to 3 sizes bigger than the suggested size. That will be worth it at Townsville because, as you can see, up here in the northeastern part of Australia, Townsville is really the biggest thing going on. So we are going to build that port up as much as possible. So having these cruisers assigned there as their home base is perfect, perfectly good, perfectly fine. And they will be able to efficiently rearm there eventually. We may move them around, but for now, we've got that as their home port. We have Bowen as to where they're going. So let's click on this task force again so we see exactly where it's going. It's going to Bowen. Ultimately, we're taking suggestions from a spreadsheet that I mentioned last time by a gentleman named Cull, who has put together a great spreadsheet of kind of suggested moves as the allied player. Uh, the reason we'll be doing this is because these cruisers have anti-aircraft, and we will be needing this up here. We'll be moving things through Bowen, so we're getting these anti-aircraft guns up here. Now, we built two other task forces last time. You may remember this one. It's beautifully named Tanker Sydney. So I always, with the naming convention, as we talked about last time, I always give the name as what's its mission and ultimately where is it going back and forth from? Where are we dropping things off to? And you may say, well, this thing is docked in Sydney right now. It's actually not. If we look over here, it's undocked. We did not dock it. These ships were at anchor, and so they will stay undocked unless you dock them. So you may say, well, what's going on? These ships are here at Sydney. Why are we calling this tanker Sydney as if it's going to be dropping off things? Because we can see it's got nothing in its cargo holds. Um, that's because we are sending this task force to beautiful Los Angeles, all the way across the Pacific. We're setting its home port at LA, which we will do with a lot of tankers and cargo ships. Generally on the West Coast, their home ports are going to be LA, San Francisco, Vancouver, and maybe Seattle, and maybe San Diego. Those are the main ports on the West Coast. Basically, all cargo and fuel ships coming off the West Coast, we will have that set as their home port. So we're sending this over. Let's get back down here to Sydney. Excuse me. As you can see, these don't move that fast. You know, one, two, three, 3.5 hexes essentially per 12-hour pulse, which means they're going to move about 7 per day. It's going to take a while. But we're moving them all the way across the Pacific and up to LA. When they get up here to LA, and I promised you I would use the mini map last time. When they get all the way up here to LA, we are then going to dock them and load them full of fuel, and then we're going to send them right back to Sydney by the very same path. And we will have to give them orders, but they will go into LA. That's now their home port, and they will sit there until we tell them what to do. Now, you maybe remember last time we set a waypoint. So let's bring this up again. Set task force routing, waypoints. If we click on that, it's got one waypoint out here at hex 174, 169. That is that hex 174, 169. So we set the waypoint to come here, then it immediately goes to LA. If we needed it to go, let's say here and then here, we could set a waypoint 1, a waypoint 2, and then it would go straight to LA. So, you know, you could mess around with these waypoints and get these ships going exactly where you want to. With big cargo or tanker ships like this, generally we're going to be running them behind our picket fence that we talked about last time. Nomaya, Suva, Pago, on to Christmas Island, which is, where are we? There we go. Christmas Island, Palmyra, and ultimately Pearl Harbor is the big one. But that's kind of our picket fence. We'll be running cargo and fuel behind that and setting up a defensive line, and running all the way to, well, really from LA and San Diego and San Francisco to Sydney and back, just back and forth. So we set that up last time. We also had a local um, tanker task force. You may remember the Elsa and the William Sunico. We set those up last time. These have less endurance and a lesser speed. They're not really made to go transatlantic. And so tankers are going to be supplying our picket fence I was just talking about, or moving these around locally per se. Now, we have named this tanker Nomaya. We have docked it, and we are loading it with fuel. And you can also see this up here. Task Force 18, two ships, is docked at Sydney and it's loading fuel. So we'll start to see this capacity fill up. As soon as it fills up, the computer automatically undocks it for you, and the task force, the ships within the task force start following their orders, which are to go to Nomaya, as we can see, go to Nomaya. Um, we want them to unload their cargo, so they're going to drop this fuel off here. They're going at mission speed. Retirement allowed. They're not going to stay at Nomaya. As soon as they unload it, they're going to return right back to Sydney because our home port is Sydney. We are going to, this is very important, tell it to not refuel out here at Nomaya. Ultimately, we're taking fuel to Nomaya. Why would we want to then fill up there when we don't have to? And we don't have to because at mission or cruise speed, this can move at 220 miles or 220 hexes. So this trip to Nomaya is 28 hexes. That's great. That's within our limit. The round trip from Nomaya to Sydney, which is what we right now have the current orders being, is 57, well within our limits. And when it comes back into Sydney, then we'll fill it up because Sydney has got a ton of fuel. Um, if this were a normal trip that we wanted these ships to be taking for the entire game, we could potentially take this off of human control. This would then become a CS Nomaya. CS for fuel, it will tell you that over here. Um, we would take this off and just put it on minimal refuel, so it's always running with a 10% cushion. And this task force would do the same thing every turn of the game until you tell it to do something different. So literally all the way till March of 1946, it would be docking at Sydney, loading fuel, going to Nomaya, unloading fuel, and then coming back and doing it all over again. So ultimately, you can do that. I'm going to tell you that this task force we would not do that with because this is going to already be a lot of fuel out at Nomaya. This adds up to 13,200 fuel units. If you did this all game, Nomaya couldn't even handle that amount of fuel. There is a concept called spoilage. It may be beyond what we're doing here. It's a more advanced concept, but I'll just tell you, if your port and airfield don't add up to over a 10, you may have what's called spoilage, meaning if you have too many supplies or too much fuel there, they will go bad and basically just get removed. So just something to keep in mind to the smaller bases. They sometimes cannot handle the full shipments that you would do of fuel and supplies, and you could have spoilage. So, okay, we've done that. So that is kind of a recap of what we did last time, but those are very important concepts, and I just wanted to make sure we had them. We're going to pull back up our ships at anchor, which we can do right over here, ships at anchor. And let's look at what we have left. Let's do a little search here for a second and see what we have left. Um, Looking down here, oh, I guess I had clicked this over to cargo ships before I got online here. Now we see what ships we really have left. Let's flip these the other way. Okay, so we've got, this destroyer we talked about last time. We've got some mine stuff here. We've got an armored cruiser we'll talk about, but we still have a tanker left. Now, this tanker, called the Gulf Pride, has an endurance that's okay, but it's kind of below that 10,000 threshold, and really maybe even 12,000 threshold that we talked about for transatlantic. So it's not big enough for that. It does have really good speed, so that's great. And it's got a huge cargo or huge liquid capacity. I mean, that's got to be one of the bigger ones in the game early in the game. Now, we had talked about that Cole spreadsheet. What does Cole think we ought to do here? So we pull this tanker. We know we're not going to send it to LA. We could use it, so now we're going to be this shows us everything that we can put in a tanker task force. We're going to turn off the ones that are already in task forces. And these are the ships that we could potentially put in here. We see the Gulf Pride. We're going to pick that. Great. It's tanker. We haven't given it a name yet, or any orders. So it's just sitting here. What should we do with this? Now, because of this endurance, it would probably be best to maybe make short runs if we're over here on the eastern side of Australia, to make, runs out to Auckland potentially, Nomaya that we did last time, Luganville maybe, or Suva. It actually would be pretty good for those things. But the suggested thing to do here is actually send it over here to Perth. And in previous episodes, we've talked about the importance of Perth and this convoy line that you will be running from Perth to Cape Town, or better said, Cape Town to Perth. You're going to be taking the supplies from Cape Town to Perth, or the oil, the fuel. Okay. Fuel and supplies. You're going to be taking them from Cape Town to Perth. So we're actually going to name this tanker Perth because we are, first of all, going to be sending this around the continent and up here to Perth, this tanker. It's going to come in here, it'll refuel, it'll be sitting here, and we'll say, oh, what's that tanker doing? We're going to pull it up and it's going to say tanker Perth. Now, that Perth doesn't mean it's going to sit at Perth. We know that it's going to be coming in and bringing things to Perth, and that's going to happen from Cape Town. Excuse me. Um, and so once we get it around the continent there and over to Perth, we're going to set the home as Cape Town and the destination is Cape Town. We'll take it out here. It will still be named Tanker Perth. We're going to dock it, load it, and we'll send it right back to Perth over and over again. So that's another task force. You see, that's a U.S. Navy. So this is the Gulf Pride, maybe out of Texas, flying the Texas banner and Gulf Pride there. But it's going to come to Perth first and then jump over to Cape Town. So we've built another one of those. Now, okay, so we're through our tankers as we've pulled this up. Let's look and see what else we want to do. Now you have all these APs. These are troop transports. We're not going to deal with those. We're going to do some cargo ships here, and I'll just do one or two for cargo to show you how this works. Now, so we're going to click off all ships and we're going to bring up the AK ships. The AK ships are our cargo ships, and I always like to do this by endurance. You'll get very similar ship types together or bunched together if you sort by endurance to start with. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to sort by endurance, so we look at the endurance, the speed, and the capacity. As we see right here, we've got 16,800, 16,800, 16,600. They all go 12. They all have similar capacities. I'm going to throw those into a cargo task force and then you will have to do this again with the sorting because obviously with these big ranges here, these are going to go transatlantic. So I just know that without a doubt that these three are going to be bunched together. Looking at things, you're also going to be bunching the steelworker, scientist, and mariner here. Now, normally it would also be the Lillian Lockenbach would come down here. I can just tell you that that ship is going to be converted to something else. And we are not going to talk about conversions. Essentially, this becomes what they call a tender. A tender is an auxiliary boat. This will just be carrying ammunition around. It's a good ship for that. And we can get into that when we do the Let's Play, let's say. But it's not going to be in this task force, even though it seems perfectly suited to be in this task force. Now, I threw these other three ships in here, the Mariner, the Scientist, and the Worker, and you may say, well, they've got different endurance. They do, but this is still plenty enough to get over to LA and then start making that LA to Sydney run, and they all have the same speed. Now, if these three had a different speed, let's say 10 or 14, we would put them in their own task force to make that run because we would not want them to slow these ships down, or we wouldn't want these ships to slow them down. So these are all similar enough because of the speed, and they're going to be doing the transatlantic. We're going to put them all in the same task force. So we're done. This pulls up, and we're going to label this Cargo Sydney because we're going to be making that run from LA to Sydney again. There's just really not a whole lot to worry about here. These are cargo ships. It's just not that important. We're going to set the home port to LA. So we've done that on the mini map. Now make sure just to always check that when you click on those bases, sometimes it can be a little it can give you some problems. So just make sure you click right on the flag. You can't do it like right on the area. It's got to be right on the flag, and just always make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. So we're going to set the destination. We're going to put that as LA. So again, here's LA. Make sure you see the tooltip for LA and you click right on the flag, and then it'll give you that little message. It's supposed to move to LA. We've got waypoints for this, of course. We don't want it floating through the middle of the Pacific. So we're going to come out here somewhere. I look at the mini map. We want to come here and up there. I think with that previous one, we take it a little north of Tahiti, but we want it to be underneath Pago Pago. So, right here, Flint Island, somewhere around here. I think the other one we put right up there, it's fine. Always, kind of go out here and check and make sure. Oh, whoa, where'd we go? Yeah, just make sure it's not doing anything crazy. So I just give it a quick check over, and that's another task force. And when that comes into LA and it's sitting in LA, because that's its home port, so it won't have any orders there, it'll just be sitting there. We can look at the name and say Cargo Sydney and say, oh, okay, we set that up. We need to dock that. We need to get supplies on it and get it back over to Sydney and start running supplies to Sydney. So that is another cargo task force. Hopefully you're starting to kind of get the idea. We could go, into these more. Now you see, so I talked about the Lillian Lockenbach. That is suggested that we convert that. We're not going to go into that. You see the cargo ships underneath here that are all speed 14. So that's faster than the task force we just sent out, but they're all 12,300 endurance. They've all got the same cargo capacity. So, you can kind of think about this now. What are we going to do with this? We are going to take all of these, put them in one task force because they're all essentially the same build of ship. We are going to send those to LA because we're over that kind of 10 to 12,000 limit that we think about when it comes transatlantic. We're going to send those over to LA, set their home port there, fill them up with supplies, and take them right back to Sydney. Now, I will say this 4175 is kind of close. One thing to think about when it comes to cargo capacities is if you're making that long of a journey, how much fuel are you burning up doing that. So if we were burning up, let's say the equivalent of 3,500 in fuel to carry 4,175 of supplies, does that make sense? So those are just kind of some of the things to think about. So it could be that at some point we say, this isn't worth it. We're not getting enough across the sea or across the Pacific Ocean. Let's have these go to Pearl Harbor first, and then we'll have something else from Pearl Harbor, distribute them, so on and so forth. So that's for the bigger capacity or the smaller capacities with bigger endurance. I can tell you this is worth it. We will continue having this go LA to Sydney. So now we get down here into some other ones. These are the small jump, ships. They don't have the endurance that it would take to go, LA to Sydney. or even to go Cape Town to Perth. They just don't have that kind of endurance. All of these ships we're going to be using to supply local things. So, um, we've got Launceston down here. Now that's going to come out of Melbourne. We've got ships at Melbourne. We've got ships at port in Melbourne that have. We have quite a few ships at Melbourne, by the way, but we've got some down here with like 4,000 endurance. And we're going to take one of those, put it in a task force, and just have it all game long run supply out here, and another one that does nothing but run fuel out here. So, I'm just kind of putting this in your head to start thinking about. From Sydney, where are the main points that Sydney probably is going to, supply Lord Howe Island, Norfolk. We've already got a tanker running up here to Nomaya. Um, we could have it come up here to Port Moresby, which is very important. Although, Townsville might be better, Brisbane might be better, here. They're just closer. So we could even like move 4,000 endurance ships, let's say up to Townsville, set that as their home port. And as our supply comes over ground and filters down to Townsville, we could just have it go Townsville to Port Moresby back and forth. Maybe more efficient. These are all the kinds of things you have to think about when it comes to efficiency after you set up the big nodes. So the big nodes, of course, let's go back to the grand strategic map. It's just so important that I'm going to talk about it again. The big nodes, Eastern to Panama, Panama to Pearl, or Panama to Sydney. West Coast, either Pearl or to Sydney. San Fran, generally more Pearl there, but it could, also do this out to Sydney. Same with Vancouver. Most of Vancouver, we're going to be bringing down Vancouver and Seattle. Most of that's going to go to Pearl Harbor, and then with our smaller endurance ships, we'll be, hitting these little targets. So you've got these big, massive nodes on the West Coast, and at Pearl Harbor, and at Sydney, and at Perth, and at Cape Town, and we're going to stock up Australia, and then Australia is going to start supplying from Darwin up in here, uh, over to Port Moresby. This is our big one, Perth. We're going to be dumping stuff in here. Another big one, of course, we talked about Abadan to India. From Calcutta, we're going to be going to Rangoon, and Colombo to Rangoon. So we are building these logistics networks. Um, but for things with big endurance, you almost always want them going from the big node to other big node. And then when you get there, then you can take the smaller endurance, maybe the slower ships, things that aren't as quite as valuable, and then have them make these shorter runs out here into the Pacific or up in here to the Dutch East Indies to supply stuff with more short hops. So I hope that made sense. Let's go back down to Sydney because, as promised, we are now going to get into other kinds of ships and what they do. So if you think about this game, we've got cargo, the Japanese have cargo. We have battleships, cruisers, light cruisers, etc. Uh, the more surface combat ships. The Japanese have surface combat ships. As a matter of fact, we have a couple of our surface combat ships here. We have them at a max reactive 3. So, depending on what the captain wants to do, and that's why captains become important, it will react potentially to any Japanese surface ships that show up within 3 hexes of it. Um, so the Japanese have those as well. The Japanese then have submarines. Submarines are going to be the bane of our existence at the start of the game. We're going to try to make our submarines the bane of the Japanese existence later in the game, and some to the start. We've got plenty of submarines to start with. We will get even better submarines and a lot of them in the not too distant future. So you have this whole submarine war. You also have mines. The Japanese have mines. They're going to try to mine our ports. We have mines. We're eventually going to try to mine their ports, although it's somewhat hard to do at this moment. We're on the defensive, of course. Um, so there's submarines, anti-submarines. There's mines, there's anti-mines. And these are these kind of secondary sort of ships that you'll see at most major ports. And so let's get out of here. Let's go to all ships. Um, as we go down here, we're going to sort them. We've got the Voyager again. We've got the Cruiser Merchant. And then we've got a Cruiser Mine Layer. So what is this? Well, we're going to form it into a new task force, and we're going to call it Mine Laying. Okay, seems simple enough. Uh, then it's going to bring up all the ships that can be in a mine laying task force. Now, one thing I'll point out here, I think, maybe I mentioned it before, maybe I didn't, is your cruisers, battleships, things like that. They can really be in any kind of task force, right? They're protection ships. They're out there to protect the other ships that are kind of doing what they're doing in these early game task forces. But we're going to bring up the Bungaree. That was our mine laying ship. And we're going to look at this. We see it says mine laying. And we're going to look at the Bungaree. Now, I said I don't generally kind of go into this, the armaments themselves, but I did want to point this out. We've got the VH Mike 2 mine, and we've got 150 of those. That's awesome. Got a lot of mines. Now, I'm not even going to look at this. Oh boy. Now I said it. I was going to say I'm not even going to look at the spreadsheet. I'm just going to show you how it works. But now I kind of want to know where we're going to be going. Yeah. Okay. We're going to be going up to Townsville with this, which makes sense. So we're going to set its destination to Townsville. We're going to set its home port to Townsville, and we're going to let that actually sit there um, once it gets there for a moment. And we're going to say, oh, this is the important part I wanted to point out. So we're going to say, do not lay mines. You will only get this, so this usually says cargo or unload cargo. This is lay mines, do not lay mines. So we are not going to lay mines immediately at Townsville. That's not where we want them. Eventually, and I always put this in as mine lay Moresby. Eventually, we are going to lay mines with this at Port Moresby. So we've set the destination at Townsville. We've got the home port at Townsville. It's a mine layer. We've told it do not lay mines. Because if we have it at lay mines, it's going to lay mines the minute it gets to its destination. If that's Townsville, it's going to start laying mines there. And what does that mean? You're not going to really oh, it's not an abstraction because they're there. You'll see a little asterisk come up on your anchor there, showing you that there are mines at that port. Um, your ships will not hit those mines. You don't have to worry about that. I think maybe there's a 0.0001 chance that maybe they do, but it's nothing to even think about or worry about. Your mine layer, let's just say we would have told it to lay mines. When it gets here, it's going to stop at this hex and start putting down those mines at a certain rate. I don't even know what that rate is. It may take 2, 3, 5 days. I'm not sure. But it starts laying those mines here. So if a Japanese ship or submarine tries to come here and gets up into this port, it's potentially will blow that ship sky high, right? Because it's going to run over that mine. It doesn't know it's there. Uh, it will try to do a detection on that. The better way to use mines, really, too, on these far-flung things is we'll kind of do them in a circle here. And so any Japanese sub that would come here and mess with our shipping in and out of Port Moresby. We'll also be running troop transports there. It's just a defensive thing for this port. So you want to defend this from, their submarines or capital ships. If they wanted to bombard this, they could potentially hit that mine and you could nab yourself a battleship. That would be great. We will be laying mines up here to the north, outside Balikpapan. The Japanese will be bringing big ships in here because Tarkin has big guns, and they'll try to soften us up with their battleships. We will be laying mines here, and hopefully, that it's a percentage chance that one of these ships is going to run over one of your mines and sustain some real damage. So that's what mine layers are. So let's go back to Sydney, the ships at Sydney. We only have one of those here. Uh, so we've already put it in this task force. You can see that's what a mine layer looks like. We've named it Mine Lay Moresby. So when we get up there and we're sitting at Townsville, um, we'll remember why it's there and we'll say, oh, okay, we need to run this up to Moresby. Let it drop its mines. So in which case we will change this to lay mines. Um, and then it will return as soon as it's dropped off all of its mines, it will return to its home port. Now, why did we select Townsville? Because eventually Townsville is going to be a level 7 port. It can get more mines at a level 7 port. So you want your mine layers to be going back to substantial ports so that they can pick up more mines and run back out and lay them off again. Now, as this is sitting at Moresby, let's say, and I say sitting, it will be laying mines. You will see them go down here until they hit 0. And then when it hits 0, it goes to Townsville, loads up more of these Mike 2 mines depending on what's available. Then you can have it go back to Port Moresby if you want, or you can have it return home. Now, one very important idea about mines is that if you do, I'm going to go over to LA for this. If you do have mines out in your port, and how would you know that? Well, we come down here at LA, port capacity, airfield, it says it right here. Defensive mines. We have 400 at LA. That's quite a bit. That's pretty good. We definitely want to make sure the Japanese, if they're trying to get up into our port area, really take a beating for trying to do that. Then you'll see one ACM present. What in the heck does that mean? Well, let's go to ships at anchor. Let's bring up the types. I'll flip this around really fast. ACM. We see the ACM Chemo. The Chemo is an auxiliary mine layer tender. Uh, you know, what the heck does that mean? Everywhere where you have a lot of mines, to the extent one of these ACMs is close or present, you will, if you don't have one at a port with a lot of mines, you want to try to find one at a port without mines and bring it to this port. So, I'm just totally making this up, but let's say there was an ACM out here at one of these bases, we would want to bring that into LA. And why is that? Because these ACMs are a very special kind of ship that maintain mines. So there it is again. So this maintains mines. Now you see it's got its own mines. It is a mine layer. It can do that. But its main function in the game and why they're very important is because if you drop 400 mines at LA, you don't want to have to go back and drop another 400 in, in a month, let's say. That can get expensive. You don't have enough mines anyway. So you want those to be maintained, and that's no joke, literally all that these ships do, these AC, why did I do that? Yeah, these ACMs. And that's why it tells you that. Defensive mines 400, one ACM present. It's telling you, and it's so important that it points it out to you that you have something to maintain these mines. And they're at all the big ports generally. You do not want to put them in a task force. That takes away, that puts them, in a task force to lay mines, and you don't want it to lay mines. You want it to maintain your mines. Now I'm looking here at San Francisco, and I seem to remember this, that San Francisco, nope, San Francisco does have one. I guess the easy way to have done that would have been say, oh, one ACM present. So you've got 450 mines there. What I was thinking of is I think Seattle has two ACMs for whatever reason. Click on Seattle. No, 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 no. Seattle does not have any mines and it does not have any ACMs. So we're actually going to want to bring that up here. We're going to want to lay mines at Seattle and bring an ACM up here when we find it. Um, yeah, same thing with Vancouver. Vancouver has 400 defensive mines. It doesn't have an ACM. Early on turn one, we'll go hunting, ACM hunting, to bring them to Vancouver and to Seattle. So that's mine laying and maintaining your mines. I'll be honest with you, there are not a lot of times early in the game where ships hit mines. You may get lucky near Tarakan or Palembang or Singapore. Singapore, if we go look at it, we haven't talked a ton about Singapore, and there's a lot that goes on at Singapore early in the game. Singapore is already getting bombed, as you can see. When it's in red like this, the port, it's already started to suffer damage. So in turn one, the Japanese came in to bomb our port facilities because they're going to try to keep us from getting some of this stuff out that we will try to get out. But back to the task at hand here. Singapore has 450 defensive mines, but no ACMs. So, that stinks. But I think it's because it's a hot zone. They probably got the ACM out before we actually start the game. But it's got a lot of defensive mines. As the Japanese come for Singapore, if they're trying to do any kind of landing around Singapore, you may get lucky and get one. Um, Now, keep in mind, the Japanese are going to come and mine Singapore as well. You might say, well, we got dueling mines everywhere. You really do. Um, you're going to have minesweepers that we're about to get into here in 1 second. You're about to have minesweepers that go and look for Japanese mines. The Japanese, by the same token, will send minesweepers with their, landing craft to try to detect mines. So it's this whole cat and mouse game where you've got mines down, the Japanese maybe put mines down, you're sweeping, they're sweeping, everybody's sweeping. Um, and so it's kind of fascinating, these little facets of the game that aren't the whole game by any means, and maybe not even a 1% of the game, are still really, really interesting to think about and a lot of fun. I can tell you our minesweepers, just having played this a million times, our minesweepers at Singapore start immediately picking up Japanese mines and sweeping them. Hence the name. So we're actually going to come down here to Sydney and do that. You say, do what? We're going to set up minesweepers. So we've got all ships. For this, not sure if it gets down to, oh yeah, so mines. Let's do that. Click on mine. Why is that not working? All ships. All ships at Sydney. No. Mines. Oh, okay. That was weird. Minesweeper. So we have what's called a minesweeper, and we also have what's called a coastal minesweeper. These coastal minesweepers, you're going to want to keep in this kind of shallow water. Remember we talked about that way back in episode 2 for the map, that this lighter water indicates shallow water. So these coastal guys are going to pick up better. They have less speed. They actually have a little more range, which surprises me, but they have less speed. They just kind of sit around here looking for mines in harbor. And how would we do this? I'm not even going to look at the spreadsheet. We're just going to, local mine sweeping, and then you see your 3 AM little C's. We'll pick one. And a lot of times you just have one. I name this Minesweep Sydney. Um, that will just sit here. It's a task force in the harbor, in the port of Sydney, and if any mines should show up there, great. Now let's look at the bigger minesweepers, or at least the ones that are better for going out into the deep blue. For those, instead of local minesweeping, we would just select minesweeping. Now we see what can do that. A lot of times these minesweeping ships like this, you're going to send with task forces. So they're going to be part of a task force. Now these hardly have any endurance at all, um, but they have good speed and they will be like the vanguard. So let's say, this task force where we're sending up the Perth and the Canberra, if we thought for some reason there were mines up in here, or if we had landing craft and we were trying to take Bowen back from the Japanese, let's say, we would put one of these minesweepers that's a deep water minesweeper, the AM as opposed to the AM little c, we would put that in the task force so that as we're going, it is doing minesweeping detection and we have less of a chance of one of our troop transports blowing up or one of our capital ships blowing up. So that's what these AMs are for, as opposed to the coastal minesweepers. So I think that's a pretty good rundown of how minesweeping and how mines work. Um, I'm going to do submarines now. I'm going to jump onto that. Look, we could do a 5 hour episode if we wanted to on minesweeping alone. Uh, that doesn't mean you have to get that deep into it to enjoy the game. I showed you just the high points there. You're essentially going to want to make sure you have the deep water minesweepers with important task forces where you might be encountering some mines, especially later in the game when we're sailing up to Japanese bases and we're going to be landing amphibious troops. They may have mined the entire, outside of the island. So we're going to want to send those. For the local minesweepers, those are just to make sure the Japanese haven't snuck something in there and put some mines down, because that can be a very nasty surprise when one of your transports gets blown to Kingdom Come out of one of your friendly ports. So for submarines, I'm going to go to Swearabaha. Again, I just like to say that, so bear with me if it's annoying when I say Swearabaha. Um, but we're going to look for submarines. So all ships, nope, we're going to take all that off. SS, these are your submarines. And luckily enough, we do have some submarines here. So that's great. Now, how do we treat submarines? Submarines are lone wolves in this game. Could you do a wolf pack like the Germans did over in the Atlantic? Obviously, you can. I will tell you just because of the way detection works, um, you really want to keep these in their own separate task force. You wouldn't want all five of these to be in the same task force because if a destroyer, a Japanese destroyer, an anti-sub ship of some sort detects that task force, it's going to detect all of these. Well, you don't want that, because it may just throw depth charges down and get lucky and hit something. So you don't want these all in their own or all in the same task force. You want them in their own. And how do we do that? We're going to form a task force. You can see this is Dutch. It's gray. The Dutch submarines are actually pretty dang good. I like them a lot better than the US subs early in the game. So the order here, Sub Patrol. Cool. We see that we've got some that are damaged here. We haven't talked much about damage. I think at the end of this episode, I'll show you how to repair ships, how that works. But we're just going to click on this. We're going to take out the, I guess this is sub 40, the KX. And if my Roman numerals, if I remember correctly, that would make it 40. So that's great. We have that. We have the KX out here. It's obviously its own flagship. Um, it does not have a name yet. Usually you know, I'll put in here either where we're going to have it patrolling, which we'll get to in a minute, or I'll just, leave it or type in SXKX. But for these purposes, we're going to put Patrol North Borneo. Okay, so when we click on this, we'll always know what the deal is with this sub patrol, and we are going to set its patrol zone. So subs patrol, that's what they do. So let's back out of here for a second. We've got our subs set up. They move the same way that ships do. All of that's the same. You do not have to tell it whether to submerge or not submerge. You don't have to do any of that. What we're going to do is set up a patrol zone for this thing where we think Japanese ships may be um, sailing. So we want to put these in places where we think they might be getting supplies, where they might be moving troops. So, I mean, just looking at this for a moment, right? They're coming down the peninsula. They're moving towards Singapore. We know that. From the Japanese homelands over here, or Taiwan, the Japanese homelands, or Taiwan, Formosa if you prefer, they're going to be trying to send supplies this way, maybe even out of Saigon. So as they come down the peninsula, so what are we going to do? We're going to try to put subs like right here. We've already got some. Hey, spoiler alert, here's a Dutch sub. Here's another Dutch sub. Here's another Dutch sub. So obviously the computer has already thought about this, or at least this is how the scenario starts, where we've got 3 subs stationed here because we assume the Japanese are going to be bringing supply this way. In addition, we have more Dutch subs down here, right? So, and you see this movement that they're doing right now. They're all headed back to Swerbaha until we give them orders. Why is that? Because all of the ships you already have out at sea, for the most part, are under computer control. Now this shows human control, but it's going back to our port. So maybe that's just how they're set. They're all going back to the home port. So for Dutch subs, the home port is always the Swerbaha. It's the biggest port. It's where it can get rearmed. It can get more torpedoes. This is good. This is what we want. We want them all to go back here. This is the best Dutch port. Um, for the Americans, and the Americans do have subs out here. Let's try to find some. Well, I know they're out here somewhere. Huh, interesting. Do they not? Oh, well, here's one. We are going to have a lot of subs up in here. Maybe they've all retreated to Manila by December 8th. Yeah, well, I would say that is true. Look at all these subs you have at Manila. Um, wow, right? That's going to be a lot of fun to set those up because, we can put one, here. We can put several out in here. We can even, the ones with better endurances, we can put up in here by the Japanese home islands and try to nab off cargo ships. Um, yeah, that's interesting. The December 8th scenario starts them all in port. Now, I will tell you, so all of these, their home port uh, would be set automatically to Manila if you set them up as sub patrols from here. It's an interesting question how long you allow that to be. The Japanese on turn 1 are going to start attacking here. That being said, we have a lot of defensive capability on the Philippines. We've got a lot at Manila, which is this base. We've got a lot at Clark Field. We will also be dropping these ground units back. We'll be retreating. We have a lot at Bataan. So we have a lot of defensive capability here. Manila can, last a good chunk, decent little while. So maybe you do want to keep your sub base here for, the first 3 or 4 weeks of the war. I can tell you at some point you're going to lose Manila unless something really strange happens. And so you're going to have to find a new home port for US subs. Now, an obvious place is Pearl Harbor. And we see all of these US subs out here. that are monitoring around the Hawaiian Islands. As we do the Let's Play, there are also a ton of subs here at port. Um, Oh, I said a ton. There's only four. Well, there are a bunch coming. Let's put it that way. And the ones with bigger endurance, you saw it. Let's bring that up again. The ones with like 11,000 endurance, we're going to be setting sail with those out in here to mess around with Japanese supply lines. Um, they're going to be trying to reinforce and supply all of these places. We're going to use our submarines to disrupt that as much as possible. So let's get back. So Pearl Harbor. Let me finish that thought actually. Let's get over here to the Philippines. There we go. We start with Manila as the main U.S. submarine base. That we're either going to kick back to Townsville, or if Townsville isn't built up enough to resupply them, uh, they may have to go all the way back down to Sydney or over to Perth. Again, Perth is a size 5 at this point. What we're really going to be trying to do is build up Townsville as fast as possible, the port here, get that to a level 7, and then all of our subs, we can set all of our subs to Townsville as its home base. It can rearm, refuel, and so on. One other point about subs before we start setting patrol zones is they do have a fuel requirement, just like every other ship. As you can see here, this is the one we set up, the KX. As you can see, the fuel is 123 hexes. That is how many hexes, obviously, it can move before it needs to refuel. Um, if it's starting to run out of fuel, just like every other ship in this game, and maybe I've mentioned this, I just can't remember. If it's starting to run out of fuel, it will automatically return to its home base. So you don't have to be monitoring, oh my gosh, my submarine's out of fuel. It's just dead in the water there. It will automatically come back to its home base. Now, if it cut it too close, it may only move 1 hex per turn. That's the minimum that a ship will move. So even if it's out of fuel, it will move 1 hex. So if you cut it close, and it's a little bit less of a problem for a sub, right? The sub's submerged. Hell, you kind of maybe hope it runs into something enemy-wise so it can blow it up. But that becomes a bigger issue if you've got your big battleships out there and all of a sudden one runs out of gas. It can move 1 hex. But with subs, it's got 123 hexes. This is based on its endurance. I can tell you this is a very low endurance for a sub. As a matter of fact, let's dock and try to replenish this. Nope, it's got no more. I also could have checked here, which shows its fuel load and what the percentage is. This shows its endurance and how many hexes it can run. Um, But let's set up what this sub's actually going to do. So we've got a destination, which just means it's sitting, in the port. That's its home port. Let's set up a patrol zone. So we're going to hit set patrol zone. You can do this two different ways. You can either say patrol around a target. So let's just say, hey, it's the island Groot. Cool. Let's just say we wanted it to patrol around here. You click on that. It puts some coordinates in there, and as you can see, it sets up its own little waypoints. It'll just go back and forth here because we told it to patrol around this. You may say, that's not very good. It didn't do a very good job. Do never when you do patrol zones, never click on land, right? It just kind of screws up the algorithm. So let's try this again. You clear the patrol zone, patrol around something. Let's patrol, and again, subs you generally want to keep in deep water. Let's patrol around that. What's it going to say now? So it's set boundary 1, set boundary 2. The computer automatically did this around that point we just set. Now linger, what does that mean? Linger means it'll go to point 1, it'll sit there for 2 days, then it'll go to point 2, it'll sit there for 2 days, then it'll go to point 3. It does not linger at all, so it immediately goes back to point 1, and it just keeps cycling and cycling and cycling. Um, so you can refuel on these things. So if you have something that you're running patrol, this works for everything that you would want to use as a patrol. This works. Um, so we've had the computer do this as it will. Let's look up here and look at this. Um, so I think we clicked on maybe this spot and, look at this. It just creates its own patrol zone. And it's just going to go from green to green. It's going to linger a couple of days, go to green, linger. If you want to look at this and see exactly which hex is which hex, feel free. You can also manually set these. So set boundary 1. Let's do it here. I usually set these manually, to be honest with you, because once you get used to it, you can see. So there's boundary 1. Let's have this come down here. That's boundary 2. And here's boundary 3. And this will show you, we're not going to put in linger. Let's not worry about that. This will kind of show you this is the patrol zone. Now, the other super important thing to remember about your big capital ships or your destroyers that are doing anti-sub that we'll get into in a minute, or the subs themselves, this max react. So I always play this as 1 with the submarines, especially when playing the AI. Now, if you're playing a human, you may go up to 2 or 3 because if the sub sniffs out something maybe 3 hexes away, you probably want it to go over there and blow it up. To keep it fair for the I just put this as 1 for subs. What does that mean? If the sub is right here and it detects through detection levels, or we get detection levels, whatever, that an enemy task force is here, it will move over here and follow it. So it's reacting within 1 hex of where it currently is. And it's very important, right? If you did have this, well, you can't even go above 1 with the Dutch sub. Okay, perfect. So that will react within 40 nautical miles this way, 40 nautical here, 40, it's going to react within 1 hex if there are enemies, and then the submarine captain is going to decide, is that target worthy enough? The submarine captain, depending on whether he is aggressive or not aggressive, just how good of a captain he is, will take other actions. You're just giving it general orders saying, hey, if it's within 1, awesome. Great. Now let's finish this episode up with anti-sub. For that, I think we can go back to Sydney. There is some anti-sub stuff here. Now, anti-sub and sub work very similarly. So we're going to turn this back on to all ships. Uh, you know, we don't have any subs here. That's why it's not letting us click on that. That's why I couldn't figure that out before. But we're going to look down here at the Voyager. The Voyager is a destroyer. I can tell you other good uh, ships that can be anti-sub are mine layers, actually. So, or I'm sorry, minesweepers. I said mine layers, minesweepers. Minesweepers not only figure out where mines are, look at this anti-submarine. 4. I always use my AM ships. Um, to either be part of task forces later in the game, to sweep mines and look for subs, or early in the game, you can use them as straight up anti-sub. What's the Voyager? What's our destroyer here? It's only a 2, which isn't very good. Well, it doesn't have any radar. It does have depth charges, so we can run it. So we're just going to do this. As our anti-sub here at Sydney for now. What you'll want to do is set up all kinds of anti-sub nets, for lack of a better word, where you've got ships patrolling here, there, and everywhere around your major ports. So let's form a new task force. This is going to be ASW combat. We're going to select that. You'll see here, see I said the AM ships, they've got anti-sub. You can look right over here, ASW. So the 2 AMs are the best anti-sub we got here. But we're going to do the destroyer. We don't want to hurt their feelings. They've got a big new shiny ship. They're not as good as the AMs though. So We'll call this ASW Sydney. Easy done, right? And then you set up patrol zones. Now with ASW, you maybe want to do that around a target. So, how about right here? What does this draw for us? This is where the computer's doing it. It did 3 boundaries. We linger at the second and third one. You know, it's kind of just run an algorithm and said, hey, this is where we should patrol for subs. Again, I don't really think it does a great job. Let's clear the patrol zone. Let's set a boundary. Uh, Whether I should or I shouldn't, I always kind of look at these circles. These are the cruise and mission speed. And anti-sub, minesweepers, those kind of things will be going at mission speed all the time. I always look at these and I think, yeah, okay, how about there's one boundary and there's 2 boundary and let's have it go back here close to Sydney. Great, you know. Linger, sure. We'll have it linger 1 day at each place. Now, the interesting thing, and I didn't say this, sorry, I didn't say this when we did the submarines, is this shows you the second number here, how many hexes one patrol doing exactly what you've told it to do here, how many hexes that means from a fuel perspective. So this will be 16 hexes. You can work out the math if you want. That means we're going to be able to do about 4 patrols of this, you know, and we're lingering days. So, what are we talking? 12 or 15 days doing this patrol around. And then when it's done or it's getting low on fuel, it'll go back to Sydney. It'll fuel up. Now, again, if you had something in patrol like a sub and you wanted to refuel it so it doesn't have to return all the way to base, we could have it merge or meet up with a refueling ship. But that's a little bit beyond our scope here in a basic tutorial. I will be doing that in a Let's Play if you guys, want to watch that after we get done with the tutorials. But I think we're at a good stopping point. We're a little over an hour. We covered a lot this time, anti-sub, sub. We talked more about task forces. We talked about patrol zones. We did not talk about repair. I wanted to do that, but I think we'll start off next episode with that. Um, Shoot, I want to do air wings next episode, so let's just do it now. So we're looking at all ships. Let's make sure that's true. Now we remember we had a hurt ship, I do believe, at Sydney. Did we not? Did we have something? Now this is an easy way to look at it. No. Oh, you know what? Let's go up to Swearabaha. So another advantage of the big ports is, now we're going to look at this. Yep, we've got damage here. Another advantage of the big ports is that they have repair yards. Now this is only an 8. That's not very big. I believe Pearl Harbor is maybe near 100. Well, let's go look. Pearl Harbor has a repair shipyard here of 100. Nice guess. Um, so this is not a big repair shipyard, yet I think it's the only one the Dutch have, or at least it's the biggest one. So what do we have here? We have, you know, you can just click here and sort for what's damaged. I generally will repair anything over 10 for any of these things. So what are they? System damage, float damage, engine damage, and fire. You can look further into the rule book if you want. You can watch the Let's Play if we want. The basic idea here is that this, is like uh, the systems that make the boat run, the ship run. Float is how much water it's taking on. If this gets to 99, the ship will sink. This is engines, so this will slow you down if the engines are having a problem. And then the fire is kind of self-explanatory. You really can't even repair anything if you have a big enough fire going on. But this will continue to cause other damage. So system, float, engine, Look, it's not entirely important that you sit here and figure out every last permutation of this kind of damage. What it comes down to is we want to get this repaired. So we go to the KVII. You will see down here, first of all, we got a victory value, which is important and we'll talk about at some point. But current repair estimate is 16 days. So it's in here at port, right? It's at Suera Baja. It is getting repaired. It's going to take about 16 days. This is what we call pier side repair. It's just trying to get it up to, well, that's not true. This is readiness repair. We're just trying to get it up to being seaworthy and back out there. So in 16 days, it will be ready to float again and go out and do things. Maybe not as efficiently as it did before. You can also set a priority. Now let's knock off readiness. And now what have we got? That means the ship has been stood down. So readiness, if you're in a hot war zone, you may just want to repair something enough and then get it back out there or get it away. Stood down means you've actually moved this thing back to the repair yard. This has been taken to the yard. You've stood it down. Um, well, in this case, it's still at the pier side, but you have stood it down. It's not ready to go back out. You couldn't at a moment's notice. It would take a day or two, I believe, a turn or two, to get it back out onto the open seas. But it's being repaired at the pier side. The pier side is not going to be as good or efficient or as fast. So then you go to repair ship. You have dedicated crew that will come repair ships. You may even have other ships that repair ships. That's what this option is. And then finally, Shipyard. Shipyard is the best if you have capacity to do it. So you've stood this down, they've rolled it back to the shipyard, they put it on blocks and got it, off the pier. The priority is normal. This is going to take 6 days to fix this. Let's go back to readiness. 16 days. But if we look at where would we go to do that? Oh yeah, it's repair yard. If we go to look at Suera Baja, this is the show ships under repair. We have none now. Let's look at these again and let's go put this back in the shipyard. So you would not see that under repair because they're just trying to fix it right next to the pier and keep it ready to go. But we're going to in the readiness, but we're going to stand it down and we're going to send this sucker back to the shipyard. Okay, exit. Now we come back over here to our anchorage, show ships under repair. There it is, right? So we'll see that this is in here. It gives all the stats of what's going on repair wise. It will no longer oh, we have to click on this again to come back to all active ships. So it's showing ships under repair. Nope, now it's showing active ships. Um, it will take it out of that list, and then we'll, take this one and send it back to the shipyard. Same idea. We go to, this screen here. Now we've got them both back here at the shipyard. Here's the important things to remember about shipyards. You're like, well, why wouldn't you always send it to the shipyard? Well, as I said, sometimes you want to do readiness, and readiness can get it back out on the water when you need it out there. Um, so that's the one thing. But if you do stand it down, you've only got so much capacity. You've got 8,000 tons of capacity in the repair shipyard. So you could only go up to that amount. Now you could go over that amount, but it will slow everything down. So you really want to look at that number. Right now we're only using 1,340 tons for these two subs, so great. We would leave them in the shipyard. We want those to get repaired. See two ships in the yard. That makes sense. It gives you some other stats here. But if this shipyard was full, then maybe we would look at this and we would it's going to be stood down no matter what now, but we maybe would turn it to pier side where its own crew tries to fix it, repair ship where a repair ship that's in port comes and tries to fix it. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that before we move on to air wings because it is an important concept. So thanks again for joining me. As always, I always really appreciate it. I'm enjoying doing these. I hope you're enjoying listening to them. This has been Strategy Gaming Dojo. This has been episode 7 over submarines, anti-subs, and a whole basket of other things having to do with ships. Next time, we'll be moving on to planes. And again, I thank you for joining me. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.